song for every bomb that flies. I'd sing each and all the days. If there were to be a verse for every dying child's cries, for every helpless father's gaze.
Bringing peace and social justice issues into your living room, piece by piece. I'm your host, Pat Miner, and as you can see, when he backs up a little bit, you'll see that our set is a little bit different this time. We're showing a little flowers this time. I hope we're not setting a precedent. And now we're doing with a white background. We're going to give that a shot and see how it works out. And this week we're going to talk about Syria and a little bit about ISIS. And for that expertise, we've brought in Newman Abuissa, who's a Syrian-American, and he'll tell you a little bit about who he is, remind you probably, because most of you have seen him before. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Syria right now. There's a lot of violence going on there as well.
Yeah, my name is Newman Abuissa, and I was born and raised in Damascus, Syria, until about 30 years ago when I came to study at South Dakota State University, where I got my bachelor degree and master degree in civil engineering. And I've been here in the Iowa City area for 20 years now, almost, working for the Iowa Department of Transportation. I am married and have 4 kids, and I have some family, extended family also, who came after this conflict in Syria in the last 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, you'll have to tell us a little bit about that too, because that's the beginning of the violence. What happened there and why your family members came to Iowa. And shall we start there?
I mean, the conflict started about 4 years ago. And as you might know, we have a authoritarian secular government in Syria. And that was started about 40 years ago when the father of the current president established the rule of the Ba'ath Party in the early 70s, 71, I think. And he established his government, and he was a shrewd leader and was able to hold Syria together after many coups before him. The government was changing every other year or every year before him, but then he was able to establish a stronghold of the government, establish a somewhat stronger army, and held the country together for about 30 years until he died. In the year 2000, his son took over after him, and his son was able to hold the country together. He was somewhat progressive. He started opening up Syria. He got married to a English Syrian lady, and she is, I think she has a PhD in economics, and he started intermingling with the society and trying to become popular. And he brought somewhat prosperity to Syria, but not for the whole population. So there was some enshrined, I guess, part of the population who was not happy with his rule. And the most, I guess, the surrounding countries also have a strong factor by supporting some of those people in Syria, and mostly the Islamists, the people who have a strong Islamic ideology, were in opposition to his rule, in addition to some moderates and Christians. But as time went by, the moderates kind of subsided, and the extremists took the leadership on the opposition to the government.
So there are these extremists. 4 years ago, did you say that this current violence began?
Yes.
About 4 years ago, some extremists decided are they trying to overthrow Assad?
First, I think they were somewhat a peaceful protest, and shortly after that, the government crushed the protest, and it started basically after the Arab Spring, which started earlier on in Tunisia, spread to Libya, and spread to Egypt and Yemen and Syria as well. So it was part of that Arab Spring movement, which kind of traveled from outside the area to Syria. And what so-called Arab Spring did not have a long life in Syria because the peaceful protest turned into violent protest from both sides, for that matter.
So it became violent very quickly in Syria.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're saying that both the government and the extremists. So in the beginning, there was a peaceful protest, though. Did people want democracy? Or, I mean, it seemed like that's what other, Arab Springs were about, is that people wanted more say in their government. I don't know if that's necessary.
That was probably, one of the forces behind the protest is trying to have more representative government to the Syrian people. The Syrian population is very diverse and have a history of actually coexistence and tolerance. I mean, Syria is one of the few places in the world which have minorities which date back thousands of years, if not more. I mean, it's the cradle of civilization. And I mean, I am a Christian Arab myself, and there's about 2 million Christian Arabs in Syria who lived alongside the Muslims of different sects, Shia and Sunni and Yazidis and many other smaller communities which survived in Syria. So Syria is well known for its tolerance and coexistence. Unlike surrounding countries, I mean, for example, Saudi Arabia, you can hardly have any Christian in Saudi Arabia. That same thing applies to countries like Turkey, where the Christians were a majority at some point in the Turkish history, and now there is hardly any Christians. I mean, there's persecutions of the Armenians in the past and other Christians. So the population of the Christians in Turkey is close to zero now. Or a very, very small percentage. On the other side, Syria, we are a testimony of the coexistence of the religious groups in Syria, which have all kinds of Muslims in addition to all kinds of Christians. On the street called Strait where I lived in Damascus, we have actually 10 different Christian denominations in that same area, and they have churches representing them. And they all coexisted, they all respected each other. And from my experience, that was a healthy, diverse population, which helps people to challenge their ideas and try to stimulate their thinkings and improve their relationship with each other. And that was the norm. I mean, the secular government was overseeing this, of course, and it did protect the minorities, and the minorities were able to prosper during that time.
So there was a large, what was the main population of Syria? Were they Muslims, or was
the
it,
majority
you think it was
are Muslims.
The majority are
Muslims? Are Sunni Muslims, for that matter. About 70% of the populations are Sunni Muslims.
And Assad is
Alawite? Is Alawite, which is an offshoot of the Shia Muslims.
Oh, okay.
And they are about 12% of the population. Within that 70% Sunni population, there is also a Sunni Kurdish population, which Kurds are different than Arabs also, and they inhabit mostly northeast Syria. And the Sunni, I guess there is the secular Sunni, and there's the more religious Sunni, and they are on a spectrum. And we, I guess, I mean, they are very tolerant to other religions, but then they felt like they should have the leadership of the country as a majority of the population, and that was part of this conflict.
Mm-hmm. So, which conflict?
Well, it's a civil war now. I mean, it's a civil war going on now, and it kind of evolved. The uprising evolved into a civil war, and the current conflict is actually now between the Syrian army, the official Syrian government's army, and the ISIS group, which is an extremist Islamist group in northeast Syria, and there's also Jabhat al-Nusra, which is spread on the southwest of the country. Both of those, Jabhat al-Nusra is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, and ISIS is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, is also is established only in the last summer, basically, as what they call themselves a state. and they control a large part of the Syrian territory, basically. If you look at this map on the screen, it's the majority, I guess, of the blue line is what is controlled by ISIS now. It's controlled around the Euphrates River and in that area where there is also some soil, and that was tolerated by the West as long as it was in Syria first. But then when it spread into Iraq and captured Mosul, one of the big cities, second biggest city, I think, in Iraq, that was a red flag for the West to say enough is enough for ISIS. They should not be controlling more territory. So our government said that we will degrade and eventually destroy ISIS. So the Western approach to ISIS was not to eliminate them directly, but to degrade them first and then eventually destroy them, where President Obama said it's going to take more than his term in office, which I think it's a long-term struggle, which is going to continue on for maybe a decade or more.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the people who are suffering are the Syrian population, right?
The Syrian population is paying the price. The ISIS group is estimated by the CIA to have about 30,000 troops. 10,000 of those troops are foreign to Syria. They are, some of them, 60, 70, maybe even 80 are from the United States. 1,000 or so are from Europe, Western countries, and there's 1,000 from Turkey, 2,000 from Tunisia, 1,000 from Saudi Arabia, and there's people from around the surrounding states who are migrating. And in the beginning, they were allowed by Turkey to infiltrate into Syrian territory and fight alongside ISIS. And those troops are not representative of the Syrian population, but the Syrian population is really paying the price on both sides of this conflict.
So it's really kind of a proxy war, as they say, in some ways. The United States backs, well, it's been really difficult to figure out what the United States is trying to do, as far as I'm concerned, because first of all, we're fighting against Assad, and now we're fighting against ISIS, which Assad is, it's what they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So it's been difficult for me to figure out exactly how the United States is feeling about Assad, and now I think it was yesterday or today I read another article that said that Obama is rethinking his strategy in Syria. I don't know if you saw that or not, but he's thinking about maybe we really do need to think about regime change in Syria. So I worry about that a little bit in terms of, I understand the whole, I don't know. In the beginning, it seemed to me, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but in the beginning it seemed to me that, as you mentioned, it was part of the Arab Spring, and so what people that were, I don't know if they were fighting, but they were protesting against, as you mentioned earlier, was that they were protesting against not having a voice in their own government. Whether that means what we think of as democracy or something a little less than that. At least they wanted more say in what their government was doing. And so in the beginning, it seemed to me like it happened there the same way it had happened in some other areas, is that they weren't so much against Assad as they were against some of the extremism that they saw in the government. Is that correct?
Well, you have many questions here. You talk about the American government policies and objective in the Middle East, and then you talk also about the aspiration of the people.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about the aspiration of the people, but let's talk about the American policy in the Middle East. That is really
we'll start with that.
An important issue which might be of interest. Historically, the United States supported Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is one of the extremist Muslim countries in the Middle East. They have the Wahhabi movement, which is similar in ideology to ISIS.
Okay.
And we've supported them since World War II. We paint them as the bad guys sometimes, but as government to government. We used to have army in Saudi Arabia until bin Laden said that we don't want you to be on our land. So they moved our troops basically outside the Saudi Arabia proper territory, but they put them in the Gulf on ships, or in Qatar, or in Kuwait, or in surrounding countries. So we have a strong interest in the Middle East, in the oil, and in the whole area and its relationship to the rest of the world. So we supported Saudi Arabia, and we are still supporting Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia supported the ISIS in the beginning, and now officially they are not supporting them. But however, some Saudi rich people are still funding some of the ISIS activities. And at the same time, we opposed the Saddam Hussein secular government, and we opposed the Assad secular governments also. So our own policy in the Middle East has been somewhat sided with the Islamists, and that's from Saudi Arabia. But we want them to be in control to a manageable level, to not to have control over when they start basically beheading Americans. That's a red line they crossed, and that was when we started fighting them. But as long as they were beheading each other, that was acceptable to us, and that is really the way I understand our policy.
Yeah, so in other words, it doesn't make much sense to you either.
Well, it does make sense. I mean, they are trying to keep the region divided and weak.
Really? Is that what you think?
This is my thought, yes. And that is also,
it makes sense to me.
Yeah, there's also our ally, basically, Israel in the area, which is also helping in those manners. I think when Saddam had a nuclear capability, through the help of France, actually, Israel went ahead and bombed his nuclear reactors. The same thing when Syria tried to build a nuclear reactor with the help of the Koreans. Israel went ahead and bombed the Korean the plant in Syria, northeast Syria as well. Last week, 4 Syrian nuclear scientists were assassinated in Syria.
Really?
So there is a intentional movement by somebody trying to reduce the capability of the countries in that area. And the area was basically established after World War II through what is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement between France and England, where they divided the countries and they established the State of Israel in 1948. And that was the establishment which has been governing the land since that time, basically, until recently, when ISIS now is not respecting the United Nations borders or the approved borders, and they are trying to create a state which encompasses multiple states. When they established the state of Syria or Iraq, it didn't make much, I guess, sense on ethnic or religious. They just kind of put lines in the sand, and they established those countries, and those countries were living by the rule of the law, according to international law, at least, the United Nations Charter, and they established their own countries until recently, where things start integrating basically in Syria and Iraq, and the Kurdish population want their own autonomy, and that creates a threat to Turkey. Turkey wants the Kurds in Turkey basically to stay part of the Turkish government, and for example, when ISIS and the Kurds were fighting in Kobani in the last month or so, the Turkish army refused to go to the help of the Kurdish population because they were apprehensive about the Kurdish intentions in eastern Turkey. And they kind of stayed watching ISIS, and they are still fighting till today. And no other country coming from outside and trying to help finish those fights. I guess there is enough support from the surrounding countries for the fights to continue between the government of Syria, the Kurds, and for the rebels and ISIS. But there's no strong government outside the area which is going to step in and try to finish this fight. Kind of similar, I think, what happened in Lebanon in the 1980s. And at that time, there was many small factions fighting with each other. But then the Syrian army, by the agreement of the Arab League, came into Lebanon and established peace. Basically, they disarmed all the militias, and they forced everybody to live together. And that's how the peace was established in Lebanon. In Syria now, there's surrounding countries actually supporting the different factions, and they are supporting them enough to survive, but not to overcome the other side or to be defeated. So we have a stalemate basically supported by the surrounding states, and we've been in that situation for more than a couple of years now.
Yeah, and it seems like, to go back to what the people want and what's happening to the people, how many refugees have been established now? Do you have any recent statistics on that?
Yeah, we have about 4 million refugees outside Syria, and it's devastating. It's the largest refugee crisis in the recent history. And we have internally about 6 million also Syrians who were moved from one part of Syria to another, try to avoid conflict. For example, when the fight was going on in Aleppo, a town of more than 2 million people, it was basically gutted of all the populations, and the different factions kept on fighting. And the town, which is a historic city, has international monuments and registered historic places, also is decimated basically. And the fight's still going on in Aleppo. But most of the population either went to Turkey or went to the Syrian government, and they kind of fled the area. And that crisis situation is huge. There's more than 1 million refugee in Lebanon, more than 1 million refugee in Jordan, and those are small countries. I mean, Lebanon
Right.
and Jordan are not very big countries. I mean, Lebanon is like 4 million, and Jordan is slightly more. And also there's close to 1 million probably in Turkey as well. So there is a huge number of populations living in tents, and the Syrian government provided, I mean, somewhat schooling and shelter and healthcare somewhat. Now all those things are not available in some of those refugee camps, and we have a new generation without schools, without medical attention, and it's a terrible situation.
Yeah, and people don't know about it. It drops off their radar because we had a peace agreement with China, or an agreement about the environment.
Oh yeah,
with China, and so that's what I mean. I think that's an important issue also, but we don't see too much in the news anymore about what's going on in Syria, except that how we're fighting ISIS, and I'm not sure that we really want to talk about it as ISIS, because do they really have a state, Islamic State?
That's what they call themselves. I mean,
That's
many
what they call
Muslims
themselves.
don't approve of their ideology. They are the extremist. They take the extremist ideology in the Muslim religion, and the vast majority of the Muslims do not approve of their ideology. And they try, I guess, now to even influence other Muslim extremists in surrounding countries like Egypt and Yemen and many other countries. So they do have, I mean, some ideology, which is also, they capitalize on the destroyed infrastructure out of basically the government collapse in Iraq during the Saddam Hussein, and then it kind of became more sectarian, and they kind of build on that sectarian division between Sunni and Shia, and also they are building the same thing on the same sectarian division within the Syrian society. Even though the majority of the Syrians fled their control and fled to under the government I mean, some of the population went under the government control because they disagree with the Islam. However, there is some part of the society which is at least accepting them, and that's what is keeping them alive. And there was, I think, some also help from surrounding countries as well. When they were established, I remember them getting supplies through Turkey, they're getting recruits through Turkey, and that was okay in the beginning. But then, most recently here, there is a coalition against ISIS between surrounding
Was it
countries.
because they thought, I mean, I know we can speculate about why other governments supported ISIS in the beginning, but I think our government did as well. You know, we gave them some money. There are some
I
some
think we
people
gave the
who
moderate,
think
we
that
gave
the
the
CIA
moderates.
created them.
Yeah, we gave, we gave the moderate opposition help, and the moderate opposition were overtaken by the extremists. And I mean, that's how things got to the extremists. But I mean, destroying an established structure create a chaos which allows extremists to build another structure. There was a structure by the Syrian government. There was a structure in Iraq also. And we destroyed the structure in Iraq, saying that we want the majority of the Shia to be in government, and the majority of the Shia came into government in Iraq, but then the Sunnis were marginalized, and then the Sunnis were rebellious. And that's part of what ISIS tried to capitalize on. And the same thing happened in Syria as well.
And I think the same thing happened in Libya. I mean, I think that's a lot of what's happened in there too. They are also in a civil war in Libya. So, I don't know that they've created as many, partly because they're a much larger country with fewer, well, not larger than Syria, but they have a less population in Libya. There's large parts of Libya that are not populated.
Yeah, I mean, in Libya, a slightly different situation where the United Nations allowed outside forces like the United States to bomb. And when we got the permission to bomb, basically we dismantled the Gaddafi government, and the Gaddafi government was collapsed, and then he was executed later. And
but in Libya, it was the people that rose up against Gaddafi in the beginning.
The people rose up against Gaddafi, but I don't think they would have been able to overthrow Gaddafi without the help of the West.
That's correct, but also the Libyans wanted us to go in there, which is different than in Syria, as I understand it, right?
Well, I mean, in Syria, the United Nations allowed basically the United States to bomb from the air Libya. And that was okay with the Security Council.
That was exactly what Libyans wanted them to do, though. That's exactly what they wanted them to do.
They want to overthrow Gaddafi.
Yeah, they did.
And also, I guess, now
they wanted the United States to come and bomb Gaddafi. That's exactly what they wanted him to do.
Okay.
And that's what the United States did. I'm not sure that was the best decision at the time. I was convinced it was. I'm now having second thoughts about that because I think what happens is exactly what you said, is that it creates chaos in the midst then, and then we withdraw. We don't give any support to whatever side we decide, we want to support, and then chaos ensues, and then the Islamists come in and take over. And that seems to be basically what's happened in Libya as well.
I mean, Condoleezza Rice talked about creative chaos. I mean, that's what the United States policy was at some point, trying to create a creative chaos to change the structure.
To change the regime.
To change the regimes. Yeah. But then you are right, they don't have an alternative which can stand and provide security and prosperity. I mean, all what I understand in Libya, only the oil ministry is functioning. All the other ministries are not functioning.
Right, there's nothing functioning there anymore.
And I mean, the education, the healthcare, the housing, and many other sectors are not functioning. And the oil ministry is functioning because of the protection and help of the West, because we have vested interest in the oil in Libya. But then when it comes to the Libyan populations who needs education and housing and healthcare, those areas are not being helped in those areas.
Right, and they're doing, some of them are fleeing, as they are in Syria, and some of them are suffering as the Syrians that live there are suffering.
Yeah, even though the Arab economy is doubling every 4 years. I mean, there is enough resources in the area which can bring prosperity to the Arab populations, and they are building the tallest building in the world in Dubai, and maybe shortly in Saudi Arabia, and they have lots of resources to build, but they are lopsided. They are not building them where the population needs them. They are not building. They are not helping the needy who needs the shelter, the food, the education and healthcare, and then there's people who are building skyscrapers.
Yeah. So what are you saying? That the places who have the money should be helping the Arab nations who have the money should be helping the other nations? Is that what you mean?
Well, a balanced policy usually have balanced growth. You cannot have. Even we see in this country the difference between the rich and the poor is growing.
Yes.
And that is not a healthy situation. I mean, the rich don't need more money, and the poor don't need money, but they need education, they need healthcare. I mean, they need the basic human right issues, and that's what I think should be in this country and should be in the Arab world as well.
Well, yeah, there is enough, in spite of what we all are pushed into believing at times, there is enough to go around, and if we would just, we're the richest country in the world, and we could not only help our own, but we could help other people as well. But part of the problem is, and I always go back to the whole idea of, and you're starting to see this in some of the, not just Israel-Palestine anymore, but I heard it just the other day, and I can't remember who was talking about it again. I think it was ISIS, actually, that was talking about how they were so angry with the United States because of what they had done in Israel-Palestine, the support that we've given to Israel in the Palestinian situation. And I remember when I first got to the area in 2004, I realized this, very, very quickly that it was the Palestine-Israel situation that is at the heart of the whole issue in the Middle East. And I remember Gaddafi used to say that, and we always just said, and Saddam Hussein used to say that. And in the United States, we just said, oh yeah, he's just using that as an excuse. But I don't think he was. I think he was serious.
There is a strong feeling about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict along the whole Middle East. It's the oldest continuous conflict since 1948, and we've seen refugees, and we've lived with them in the Middle East for decades. And so the Palestinian refugees in the beginning, and the Palestinian society also was dismantled, and they are very educated people, the Palestinian people. They are probably the most educated in the Middle East, and many of them they became refugees in the Arab world and outside in the West as well, and they are the most educated, most prosperous as well in the Middle East and also in the West. I mean, some of them came here, and I went to college. Two of my professors were Palestinians, and they are present in this country as well. So, I mean, the people are at heart like any other people. There is the bad, there is the good, but then the policies of the governments are the issue. I mean, we talk about the needs of the Middle East Syrian people, for example, and what we help. I mean, fighting an army is not cheap. So we are willing to spend billions of dollars on supporting the army. On the other hand, we spend a small portion of that in supporting civilian populations. And the civilian populations, I think, I mean, the help goes a long way with the civilian population, a lot more, I think, than helping with weapons. I mean, it's cheaper to build schools than to build bombs and tanks and so on. But I mean, we are the strongest nation on the earth, and we spend, some estimates say we spend about $3 trillion in our war with Iraq. And that is, I mean, lots of our resources went to war, and that was supported by our government. Basically, the military complex have a huge lobby in our government, and it's influencing our government to keep this war going. And we are willing to spend that money on weapons. Yeah, I mean, American people are good at heart, and they do charitable I mean, we've had fundraisers for the Syrian refugees. You and I work on it, and we raise a few $1,000s here and a few $1,000s there. But if our government is not willing to have a policy which is more balanced, we will not have success. And it's more important for us, I think, to influence our elected officials to have a more balanced position especially in international relations, than what we can do with our own resources. I mean, we should do also what we can with our resources as well. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but it's also very important to influence our government and our elected officials to make the right decisions when it comes to war and peace, to relationship with other countries, and trying to establish the American values outside this country as well.
I think that the United States has looked at the situation in an upside-down manner. And it just seems to me that what we're trying to do is, instead of, we have this war on terrorism, but instead of actually getting rid of terrorism, what we're doing is creating terrorists. Because of our policies in the Middle East, including the Palestinians, including Iraq, including Afghanistan, including Syria, we think we can fix the problem by bombing people, by bombing things. And it seems to me that's an upside-down mentality, that instead of understanding that every time we bomb people, we create terrorists. And so the only way to have peace in the Middle East is to go in there and try to, first of all, support the actual people who are being displaced, or refugees, or I don't like civil wars any better than the next person. I don't like war at all. But it seems to me that instead of helping things in the Middle East, the United States is making it worse. Does that make sense?
Well, there's many factors. One of them is our foreign policy. We are not the only player in the Middle East. There is an international community which is strong as well. We did mention about our relationship to Libya and how we were allowed to bomb Libya, for example, and overthrow the Gaddafi government. When it came to the Syrian government, however, both China and Russia have the veto vote in the Security Council to stop intervention from outside forces. So we were not allowed to go into Syria by these Chinese and the Russians. So there is interest globally, and there's also many local, regional players in this area. And they are also players, and they have their own interests between Saudi Arabia, Iran, those are the big ones, Turkey and Israel. And all those have competing interests.
Well, this is what I'm talking about when I say a proxy war. It isn't really about Syrians and what they want. It's about what everybody else wants.
Yeah, and there's an axis between basically the East and the West, and that's basically Iran wants to extend its influence through Iraq and Syria and Lebanon to the Mediterranean, and there's also the axis between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. They are trying to establish, to cut off the Iranian influence to the West, and those are the regional forces working, and there are also the global forces in which we are part of, and we have large say we have army in the Middle East. We have interest, and we compete with the other governments in that part of the world.
Which is part of the problem, it seems to me.
Well, we resolve our problems, our differences with the Russians and the Chinese on the Syrian land.
Right.
And the Syrians are paying it, but we do have differences between us and Russia. We do have differences between us and China. However, I guess we using our military more often than they do. And the question comes in the long run, who will be gaining more influence, through economic development or through military presence? And the military presence have its limits. We saw in our Iraqi intervention that we really did not gain from our military intervention as much as we would have gained through other means, and it was very expensive at the same time. So trying to fight the extremists with a conventional army or I guess non-conventional weapons is not feasible. It's very hard to fight extremists with an army, and I think you have to kind of work with the populations and have the populations reject the extremists, and that's how you can really limit or eliminate the influence of the extremists. And are we going to be willing to do that? That is the question. Are we willing to work with the populations to have them reject their own extremists and defeat the extremists through humanitarian relationships, aid, and sometimes, I mean, exchanges. It's not only aid. It doesn't have to come in one direction. I mean, as I mentioned, the Middle East is very resourceful, and we can be exchanging technology for oil, or there's many areas where we can exchange with the Middle Eastern countries and have somewhat good relationships. I mean, the question comes next: are we going to be able to have a good relationship with Iran? Iran is, I think, is trying to build their country, and I think they want to have a strong presence and good relationships. And then there is the issue of the nuclear enrichment in Iran, and are we going to allow nuclear enrichments for civilian use, or are we going to continue the sanctions against Iran and not work with them? I mean, that is one of the biggest sticking issues.
Well, and of course, part of that whole issue is the recent elections here in the United States, and with the Republicans taking over. And my sense is that with the Republicans taking over, we are going to see more fighting there, and it'll be interesting to see what happens that way. Because to me, we're doing way too much fighting already over there, but I don't see Republicans agreeing with Obama on the situation either. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that area. When you talk about,
I think the president have more authority in foreign policy than the Congress. To tell you the truth, I think for the next 2 years, I think
he certainly has exercised more power over it. That's for sure. According to some people, what he's doing there is illegal, because he hasn't gotten the power of war that George Bush had,
Yeah, I mean, we are bombing Syria without the Security Council basically approval. But then the Syrian government did not take the issue to the Security Council.
No. I'm not talking about the UN. I'm talking about the Congress. Congress has the power to declare war, not the president. So there's been a lot of
the American law.
Yeah.
So we violate our law, and we violate international law as well. So I'm not saying that we are saints. No.
Yeah. So I don't know what the situation is. The other thing I wanted to get back to is you mentioned something about one of a possibly more effective way of dealing with extremism is to get the people, whoever those people are, in this case, I guess we'd be talking about other Muslims, to reject extremists in their own religion. And I think that is certainly, I think I know lots of Muslims, and I don't know any Muslims that back the kinds of acts that these extremists are doing. Part of the problem with that is that we don't hear that in the mainstream media in the United States, because they all, especially with what you hear in too much of the media is, Islamists and extremists are, they're always said together. It's like somebody said this past weekend, I was at a conference, and they said, one of the things they said that has stuck in my mind is that nobody ever heard anything about Palestinians that wasn't followed by the word terrorist. So you heard Palestinian terrorists, and it's getting to the point that we hear Muslim extremists, and we don't really hear about other kinds of Muslims. We don't hear about other. It's not that the Muslims aren't condemning it. It's that we're not hearing about the fact that they do.
Yeah, I mean, the Islamic population is more than 1 billion, 1.5 billion people on this earth. And we have good relationship with the largest Islamic countries like Indonesia and many others. But then we do have, especially our media is slanted in this way, where they picture, I guess, give you the images of the extremists. They are more present on the screens than other people. I mean, you are interviewing an Arab American who. I participate in politics, and people get surprised that I'm a Christian Arab. They think all of the Arabs are Muslim. They talk to me as a Muslim. I tell them sometimes I'm not a Muslim. I'm a Christian, for example. But I do. Have many Muslim friends, and I communicate with them regularly, and I lived with them. So it's not. It's a population we can relate to on a human level. It's just our policy is sometimes is painted in those lines.
And that's one of the reasons I'm reluctant to talk about an Islamic State, because I don't think that they represent Islam.
I agree with you. They are not Islamists and they are not a state.
And so I'm reluctant to call them that, but that's what everybody else knows them by. So, and we just have to figure out a way to deal, but I think you're right. I mean, one of the things I thought about when you were talking about talking to other Muslims to be against extremism in their own religion, I was thinking about Hamas, and I know we disagree about this, so we don't need to get into an argument about it. But one of the things that happened with Hamas is we, as in the United States, considered them a terrorist group, and they do. I don't agree with everything Hamas does by any stretch of the imagination, which is the same situation. I certainly don't agree with what the Islamic extremists do. And yet Hamas was persuaded to become part of the political side. They ran in political elections. They won a political election. And the United States and Israel didn't like that. And so they decided it was, they were a terrorist organization, and the whole population of Gaza, as you know, has been punished because they consider Hamas a terrorist organization. And once again, it's the people who suffer.
They were punished before and after Hamas took power. I mean, the population in Gaza nowadays is living within walls. It's a virtual prison, basically. They're not allowed to go in and out. The Israeli government controls the borders, controls the land, controls the sea, controls the air, and they're not allowed to. I mean, it's a slightly different situation in the Gaza Strip.
But my point is that we try to condemn the actions and not the people. You know what I'm saying? We talk about extremist actions of this particular group of Islam. Because what happens is we had Hamas, we had some members who considered themselves Hamas becoming political, and because they won, I don't know how to explain it. I'm not doing this very well, I can see. But we condemn a whole organization, a whole people, in this case, the Gazans, and in some cases, it is a different situation, and it isn't. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I think we have to be really careful about how we condemn. We can condemn Islamic extremism in Hamas, and we can condemn. I don't even want to say Islamic extremism. In this case, it is, but in some cases, it's not Islamic extremism.
I mean, we can look at Islamic extremism. We can look at Christian extremism and Jewish extremism and many other extremisms.
Exactly.
And
so why do we have to talk about? I would rather leave the religion out of it, you know, and just talk about extremism.
Okay.
And we can condemn the acts of extremism, but see, that's what I think the problem is that when we can condemn the acts of extremism, but what the problem is that we condemn all of the people who are Hamas. We condemn, and in the United States, we have a tendency to condemn all the people who are Muslims because of the Islamic State. And what we need to do is separate the people or the organization or the state with the actions that that are done to them. You know, like we don't want to condemn all Syrians because obviously not all Syrians are doing this. You know, it's the Syrians who are people who are suffering. And some of those Syrian people who are suffering are Muslim. Mm-hmm. And some of them are Christians.
Yeah, I mean, the condemnation of the extremism, specifically in Syria, they are tracking extremism from Central Asia,
right,
from Europe, from Africa, and Asia at large, and the U.S. at some point. So we are attracting all those extremists, and the ISIS is attracting them, and we are fighting them. On another level, there is a difference. I mean, there is a difference in culture between the Middle East and the West. They are not the same culture. They are a slightly different culture, but that's not enough basis for them to fight. I mean, I consider myself as a bridge who was able to grow up in the Middle East and come to this country and be accepted by the American society, and able to raise a family and live here, and become part of the fabric of the American fabric. In my experience, I think it's enriching for me, and I hope it's enriching also for the people who interact with me, to understand the differences between the two cultures and make it the basis for growth, not for conflict, not for destruction.
Right.
And then when we take the extreme on both sides and have them take the lead and lead to destruction, that is sad in my view. And that's what I mean. Moderate people should be expressing themselves, try to put a limit on the extremists in this society as well as in Islam and any other culture for that matter.
And here's a good example that I heard about on the internet. Someone mentioned that when we saw people, Americans being beheaded and Westerners being beheaded by Muslim, we call them Muslim extremists, by these extremists online, that was a horrible thing for us. Although it's interesting to note that for a while they weren't even sure they were actually beheaded, because apparently, I never saw any of them, but apparently the videos stopped just before their heads were chopped off. And
those are graphic images. I mean, those images
wait.
are hard for
I
the
know, but wait,
populations. I just want to also interrupt here. Just a minute. I want to say also at the same time we're talking about two Americans who died on their hands. There is also 200,000 Syrians who died as well. And it's really immoral for us to talk only about another 200,000. So
but
we have to
my point is, wait a minute. This is exactly my point.
Okay.
My point is that, thank you for bringing that up, because my point is that Saudi Arabia regularly beheads people.
Absolutely.
Saudi Arabians are our friends. But suddenly, because these people in Syria did it and they were Americans, that made all the difference in the world. Now suddenly, it's a horrendous act because it's done by Muslim extremists. Wait, Muslim extremists do it in Saudi Arabia too.
And they do it against Muslims as well.
They do, exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's exactly my point, is that they behead Muslims in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is our friend. And...
Well, the Saudi Arabian government is our friend.
Right. Yes. And so my point is, again, it isn't against Muslims. It isn't against religion of any type. It's against these actions. It should be against, my opposition anyway, is not against Muslims, it's against extremist actions like beheading. But it's also against Saudi Arabians who behead people, not just people who call themselves the Islamic State. I think part of what we've done is we create enemies out of whoever's convenient. It's not convenient for us to call Saudi Arabians who behead people extremists or terrorists because they're our friends.
Actually, you are bringing this point of extremist actions, and extremist actions is easier to describe, is easier to portray in the media, and it's easier to propagate. On the other hand, humanitarian actions, they are not as attractive.
Yeah.
They are not as easy to spread, but there is more humanitarian actions going on in that part of the world, helping refugees, helping the sick, helping education, helping in many areas. And those are the actions which I think worth looking at, helping, learning about, and talking about. And those are really the challenges of if we are going to exist on this planet with so many other cultures, how can we help each other, and how can we learn from each other, and how can we break borders and reach outside our border and treat all humans in the same manners. Not only Americans are human, all the humans on the globe are humans. So we need to reach out to all the humans, and that is our challenge, to reach out outside our country. Even, I mean, we should start within our country also. I mean, it's not either or situation. We can start with our own populations here, reach to this disadvantaged, to the black and this other disadvantaged population of this country, and then also have the same reach out to other countries as well. And I mean, there is differences in culture, but that's not enough basis for conflict and competitions. We don't need more oil. We might be able to live on less oil if we put our minds to it and try to conserve and try to be more efficient.
Put our resources into renewable energy sources, perhaps?
Yeah, God gave us lots of resources, and we have to capitalize on our God-given resources and not only be fixated on the oil from the Middle East. I mean,
Right.
and that's, I think, what's happening. It's all not only for our own use, but the control is also control the other users of that oil. I mean, the other users, including China, basically, who is our challenge in Asia. I mean, the Chinese and the surrounding countries are making great strides in economic advancements, and they are going to keep advancing and possibly become more prosperous than us in the future. I mean, God knows what's going to happen. But I mean, we can work with the Chinese. If we can work with the Chinese, we can work with the Muslims. We can work with any other culture for that matter.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely. We need to be paying attention to what we can do, and the first thing we can do is stop bombing them. Let's stop bombing other people and see how we can help each other. You know, it just seems to me that, like I said, we have things upside down.
We have the strongest army in the world,
Right.
And if you have a hammer, you see everything as a nail. But that is not the case sometimes. We can use other tools to solve other problems. I mean, the military has a role, and it will continue to have a role. I mean, you and I cannot change the dynamics of history. Civilizations and empires always had armies and always fought, and we will probably continue to do that. And our army is our biggest asset in the globe now, but we don't really have to overuse it. And that's what I think happened in Iraq, where we used the army, where we could be using the resources in many different ways and reaching the same outcome. And we can do the same thing in Syria.
Yeah, I think we can certainly use our resources in a more thoughtful way. Maybe is what we need to look at it. I mean, if you want to send the army in, just have them leave their guns at home. Have them leave their
humanitarian.
Yeah. You know, take water in. I mean, I remember this summer that was a big deal because the refugees didn't have enough water, and it was summer, so they needed more water. Right now, as I understand it, the problem is it's raining over in the Middle East. So what we need is, you know, they need shelters, way away from the homes. I was talking to a couple of weeks ago a family who has people in Gaza, and their home was attacked by Israel in Gaza, and they don't get building material in there, so that they can't fix the holes in their house. So they were using plastic, which, you know.
Many homes were destroyed in the last summer conflict, and the same thing happening in many different situations.
And in Syria.
And in Syria as well. I mean, many people don't even homes. They are living in
tents.
tents and shelters, yeah.
And so, you know, can you imagine living in a tent in a field and it's raining and everything is mud?
Yeah, it's very, very rough situations. I mean, there's the shelter issue, there's the healthcare, there's education, and people are paying the price. And they've been doing it. Usually those situations are temporary. You think that you're going to go and live in a shelter for a few months or a few weeks, and then it's been for a few years now. And it's really harsh. And if I just want to mention that the International Orthodox Christian Charities have 27 missions in Syria helping the displaced people. And if anybody wants to donate to that organization, they can go to their website and donate directly to that website.
We have that up on the screen right now. And if people just want to donate, they can go there. Is there anything else we can do as Americans? Can you think
I mean,
of anything
yeah,
else?
talk to each other about it, organize groups, influence our governments. I mean, we can talk all what we want here. If we don't reach our elected officials who are making decisions for our government, our talks won't be as effective. I think it's incumbent on us to talk to our elected officials, to our congressmen, to our senators, and send letters even to the president and let them know what we think and what should go on. I mean, we have a huge opportunity in Iowa as the first caucus state in the nation, and many of those elected or aspiring officials who wants to be elected, they'll be coming to Iowa in the next year. So it's our responsibility and our duty to show up to those people and let them know what we think and what should be the American position in the Middle East. So I ask all of our viewers to do that, to go to meet those people who are coming to Iowa and let them know specifically about the Middle East, what we think should be done, and what we are doing right, what we are doing wrong, and what should we do different.
Yeah, we should not let them get out of Iowa without talking about the Middle East.
I mean, my experience with the Iowan population, especially with the Democratic Party, I mean, we have very fair platform on the Middle East. I was on the platform subcommittee for the Democratic Party, and I started with the county, went to the district and the state, and we had, in my view, a very balanced approach to the Middle East by recognizing Israel and Palestine as states, being fair and accepting the 1947 borders as the basis for the two-state solutions, accepting that both Israelis and Palestinians have rights in Jerusalem and let them decide what are the borders, and then allowing Palestine to be accepted as part of the United Nations. So all those were voted by the Democratic Party and are part of the platform. I ask our viewers to take the platform and ask our visitors who are coming to Iowa, are you in Iowa and do you agree with the Iowa values? I mean, these are our values which are mentioned in as mentioned in the platform, which is available on the Democratic Party website. And that can be accessed. And please ask those officials, do they agree with our positions? And if they don't agree, don't vote for them. I mean, vote for the people who agree with us.
Great. Yes. Thanks for bringing that up, Newman, and thanks for getting it done. And thanks for being with us here today. And I think we haven't quite solved Syria, but we'll get on to that next time. Thanks for joining us.